I'm Sienna, 32 years old, and I never expected to find myself sitting in my in-laws' pristine living room surrounded by family members who were taking turns explaining why I should divorce their precious son. They cited my working-class background, my apparent failure to provide grandchildren, and what they called my lack of contribution to the family legacy. I sat there quietly, hands folded in my lap, face neutral, while inside I was smiling at what they didn't know. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment, letting me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated or judged based on appearances. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turned the tables on a family who thought they knew everything about power. I grew up in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, where dreams were big but opportunities often seemed small. My dad worked as a mechanic at 2 different auto shops, while my mum juggled a day job as a school secretary and evening shifts at a local diner. They were hardworking, honest people who taught me the value of determination and self-reliance. We weren't poor exactly, but there was never anything extra. New clothes came from clearance racks, vacations meant visiting relatives who lived near lakes or beaches, and eating out was a rare treat reserved for special occasions. Despite our limited resources, I was always drawn to the idea of creating something from nothing. When I was 14, I started making beaded jewelry and selling it to classmates and teachers. By 16, I had expanded to local craft fairs, reinvesting every dollar I earned into better materials. My parents supported my entrepreneurial spirit even when they didn't fully understand it. Sienna's always had big ideas. My dad would tell anyone who would listen, a mix of pride and bewilderment in his voice. College was always the goal, but I knew my parents couldn't afford to send me to an expensive school. I worked hard, maintained a 4.0 GPA, and secured a partial scholarship to a state university where I studied business and computer science. To cover the remaining costs, I built websites for local businesses, often staying up until 3 a.m, coding after finishing my homework. By my junior year, I had a steady client base and was making enough to pay my tuition and start a modest savings account. I met Jackson Reynolds during my senior year of college. I was catering an event, not as a guest, but as the person carrying trays of appetizers to pay my rent. It was a charity gala for children's literacy held at one of those historic mansions that make you feel like you've stepped into another century. Jackson was different from the other attendees. While most barely glanced at the staff, he made eye contact, said thank you, and actually seemed interested in the people serving him. "These stuffed mushrooms are incredible," he said when I offered him my tray. "Are you enjoying the event?" I was so surprised by the question that I nearly dropped the tray. "I wouldn't know," I answered honestly. "I'm just working." Something about my candor must have intrigued him. He introduced himself, Jackson Reynolds of Reynolds Investment Group, and asked for my name. When my supervisor wasn't looking, he slipped me his business card with his personal number scribbled on the back. I almost didn't call. Men like Jackson Reynolds didn't date girls like me. At least that's what I thought at the time. But 3 days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I dialed his number fully expecting to reach a secretary or get a polite brush off. Instead, Jackson answered himself and remembered exactly who I was. "Sienna with the honest answers and the stuffed mushrooms," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant, nice but not ostentatious. Jackson was tall with warm brown eyes and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He worked at his family's investment firm managing portfolios for high net worth clients, but he spoke about it with a self-deprecating humor that put me at ease. Unlike his family, as I would later discover, Jackson had progressive values. He cared about social issues, donated to environmental causes, and genuinely wanted to use his privilege to make a positive difference. "My family's a bit traditional," he warned me on our 3rd date. "Very old money mentality. I'm something of the black sheep because I think wealth comes with responsibility beyond just making more of it." I should have paid more attention to that warning. Our relationship progressed quickly. Jackson was fascinated by my drive and creativity, the way I had built a small business while still in school. I was drawn to his genuine interest in people, regardless of their status, his generosity, and the way he listened when I talked about my dreams. 8 months after we met, he proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan, down on one knee in the sand as the sun set over the water. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," he said, holding out a ring that probably cost more than my parents' house. "You see the world differently, you work harder than anyone I know, and you make me want to be better. Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation. I was in love, and I believed that nothing, not even his traditional family, could change that. I was wrong. The first meeting with Jackson's parents was meticulously planned. He coached me on topics to avoid politics, religion, his wild college years, and names to remember countless cousins, business associates, and family friends. We went shopping for an outfit that would be appropriate. His word, not mine. Settling on a conservative navy dress that cost more than my monthly rent. As we drove through the imposing iron gates of the Reynolds estate, Jackson squeezed my hand. "Just be yourself," he said. Then immediately contradicted himself. "Well, maybe not completely yourself. Maybe just tone down the opinions a bit." Patricia Reynolds opened the door herself. No household staff visible, which I later learned was a calculated choice to appear relatable. She was a slender woman in her late 50s, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, framing a face that had clearly benefited from excellent plastic surgery. She air-kissed Jackson's cheeks before turning her critical gaze to me. "So this is the girl," she said as if I were a curiosity in a museum. "Come in, dear. Let's get a proper look at you." The house was exactly what you'd expect from old money. Antique furniture that no one actually sat on, oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors, and the kind of pristine white carpet that made me terrified to take another step. Robert Reynolds was waiting in what they called the small sitting room, which was roughly the size of my entire apartment. He was tall like Jackson, but with cold blue eyes that assessed me like a business investment. "University of Illinois," he said when Jackson introduced me. Not a question, just a statement of fact that somehow managed to sound disappointing. "Public school, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "I was fortunate to receive a scholarship." Was his only response before turning to discuss some family business matter with Jackson. Dinner was an exercise in subtle humiliation. Patricia asked about my family with exaggerated interest, making small sounds of sympathy when I mentioned my father's 2 jobs. "How difficult for you," she said, though I had never characterized my upbringing as difficult. Robert interrogated me about my career plans, barely concealing his disdain, when I mentioned my freelance web development business. "A hobby business," he called it. "Surely you'll want something more substantial once you're a Reynolds." Jackson's sister Audrey arrived late, full of insincere apologies and air kisses. She was a few years older than Jackson, with the same warm colouring, but none of the warmth in her personality. She sat beside me at dinner and peppered me with questions that seemed friendly on the surface, but carried barbs underneath. "That dress is so interesting," she said. "Is that what's fashionable for business casual these days? I'm so out of touch with ready-to-wear." Thomas Jackson's older brother was the only one who didn't bother with pretense. He looked me up and down when he arrived and said to Jackson within my earshot, "She's pretty, I'll give you that, but really, little brother, there are plenty of pretty girls from good families." Throughout the evening, I maintained my composure. I answered questions politely, complimented the house and the food, and tried to find common ground. But it was clear from the subtle glances exchanged across the table that I had been judged and found wanting. Later, as we drove home, Jackson apologized. "They're just protective," he said. "They'll warm up to you once they get to know you." "They don't want to know me," I replied. "They made up their minds before I walked through the door." "That's not true," he insisted, but he couldn't meet my eyes when he said it. Despite the disastrous first meeting, we proceeded with wedding plans. Or rather, Patricia proceeded with wedding plans. She dismissed my ideas for a small, intimate ceremony in favour of a lavish affair at the Reynolds Country Club. 300 guests, most of whom I had never met. A designer dress that she selected. Flowers imported from Holland. It was less a celebration of our love and more a demonstration of the Reynolds family wealth and status. A week before the wedding, Robert called Jackson and me into his study for what he called a little business matter. The little business matter turned out to be a prenuptial agreement prepared by the family lawyers that essentially ensured I would walk away with nothing if our marriage ended for any reason. "Just a formality," Robert said smoothly. "I'm sure you understand the need to protect the family assets." Jackson looked uncomfortable, but didn't object. I read through the document carefully, aware of Robert watching me with those calculating eyes. Then I signed it without complaint. No questions. Robert seemed almost disappointed. "No," I said simply. "I understand perfectly." What the Reynolds family didn't understand was that I had never wanted their money. And what they didn't know was that by the time I signed that prenup, I was already working on something that would one day make their fortune look like pocket change. My business idea wasn't revolutionary. The best ones rarely are. It was simply the right solution at the right time. During college, I had noticed how difficult it was for small service providers, plumbers, electricians, house cleaners, tutors, to connect with potential customers. Meanwhile, consumers struggled to find reliable service providers with transparent pricing. The solution seemed obvious, a platform that would match service providers with customers, handle scheduling and payments, and build trust through verified reviews. I had started developing the concept during my senior year, using it as my capstone project. My professors were enthusiastic, but I knew the idea needed work. After graduation, while building websites for clients, I continued refining the business model. I used my savings, about $15,000, to hire a small team of developers I'd met through freelancing. We worked nights and weekends, often at my tiny kitchen table, fueled by cheap pizza and expensive dreams. When Jackson and I started dating, I was in the early stages of development. I mentioned my app idea to him once, but he listened with the polite interest people usually give to pipe dreams. His family never asked about my work at all, except to dismiss it as a little job that I would surely give up after marriage. Their dismissal turned out to be a blessing. It meant they never pried, never interfered, and never realized what I was building. The first year was brutal. Technical challenges, limited funding, and the constant fear of a larger company beating us to market. I worked my day job building websites, came home to have dinner with Jackson, and then worked on my app until 2 or 3 in the morning. Jackson noticed my exhaustion, but attributed it to my dedication to freelancing, and occasionally suggested I cut back on clients. I smiled and agreed, then continued exactly as before. The breakthrough came 18 months into development. A friend from college had gone to work for a venture capital firm and arranged a meeting with one of the partners. I prepared for weeks, refining my pitch, creating demos, running through potential questions. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, which meant telling Jackson I had a client meeting and telling my actual clients I was unavailable that day. I arrived at the sleek downtown office in the one designer suit I owned, a splurge I had justified as a business investment. The partner, a woman named Diana Wu, listened to my pitch with an unreadable expression. When I finished, she asked a series of pointed questions about market size, customer acquisition costs, and competitive advantage. Then she leaned back in her chair. "Most of the pitches I hear are from people who want to get rich," she said. "You talk about solving a real problem that affects real people. That's refreshing." She slid a card across the table. "We're interested. Have your lawyer call mine to discuss terms." I managed to maintain my composure until I reached my car, then let out a scream of joy so loud that a passing security guard asked if I was okay. The initial investment was modest by venture capital standards, $1 million for a 20% stake. But it was enough to quit my freelance work and focus entirely on the app, which we named Connect Pro. I rented a small office space downtown, told Jackson it was for my expanding web design business, and built a core team of developers, designers, and marketing specialists. We launched Connect Pro in Chicago, first focusing on home services. The initial response exceeded our expectations. Service providers appreciated the streamlined booking and guaranteed payments, while customers loved the verified reviews and transparent pricing. Within 6 months, we expanded to 3 more cities. A year later, we were in 15 markets across the Midwest. The second round of funding came easily, allowing us to scale nationally. By our 3rd year, Connect Pro was operating in every major US city with plans for international expansion. Throughout this growth, I maintained a careful separation between my business and my personal life. The company was registered under a holding company, which was in turn owned by a trust. My name appeared on legal documents as CEO, but we kept a low public profile, focusing on growth rather than publicity. I took a modest salary, enough to contribute to household expenses without raising questions, and reinvested the rest in the company. Jackson knew I was running a service that connects contractors with customers, but the scale of the operation remained my secret. His family never asked about my work at all, beyond Patricia occasionally wondering aloud when I would give up this career nonsense and focus on starting a family. 4 years after launch, Connect Pro had revolutionized the home services industry. We had 20 million users operations in 8 countries and were valued at over $500 million. That's when the acquisition offers started coming in. Tech giant, one of the world's largest technology companies, made the first approach. Their initial offer, $800 million, was flattering but not quite tempting enough. After 3 months of negotiations, we settled on a deal, $1.2 billion, with me staying on as CEO of Connect Pro, now a tech giant subsidiary. The acquisition made me personally worth over $900 million after taxes. The trust structure and privacy measures we had put in place meant that this information was known only to me, my lawyers, my accountants, and the executive team at Tech Giant. My name never appeared in press releases or news articles about the acquisition. To the outside world, including my husband and his family, I was still just Sienna Reynolds, the web designer who had married above her station. And that's exactly how I wanted it to stay, at least for now. In the first years of our marriage, Jackson and I settled into a comfortable routine. After the acquisition, I could have bought any house I wanted, but I suggested a lovely 4-bedroom home in a nice but not ostentatious neighborhood. It was beautiful with a spacious kitchen and a backyard garden, but far from the mansion his parents expected. "Don't you want something bigger?" Jackson asked during our house hunt. "What for?" I replied. "It's just the two of us. This is plenty of space, even if we have children someday." Patricia was less diplomatic when she visited for the first time. "Well," she said, looking around our living room with a tight smile, "I suppose it's cozy. Of course you can always upgrade when Jackson makes partner at the firm." The assumption was always that any improvement in our lifestyle would come from Jackson, never from me. His family referred to my work as my little job, or that website thing you do, despite the fact that Connect Pro had become a household name. The irony was almost painful sometimes. Patricia complaining about a plumber who overcharged her, unaware that she could have found a reliable, price-transparent professional on her daughter-in-law's app. The pressure to have children began almost immediately after the wedding. At first it was subtle, Patricia sending articles about declining fertility after 30, Robert making comments about the importance of family legacy. As months turned into years, the hints became demands. "When are you going to give me grandchildren?" Patricia would ask at the weekly family dinners she insisted we attend. "I'm not getting any younger, you know." "We're not ready yet," I would respond. "We're focusing on our careers right now." This would inevitably lead to a lecture from Robert about priorities and the importance of continuing the Reynolds name. "The firm needs to stay in the family," but he would say. "That's how we've maintained our success for generations." The truth was, I did want children, just not on their timetable and not under their conditions. I wanted to build something of my own first to be financially independent in a way that even Jackson didn't understand. And once the acquisition happened, I wanted time to figure out how to integrate my new reality with my family life. Jackson tried to mediate between his family and me, but he never truly stood up to them. At best, he would change the subject when they became too overbearing. At worst, he would join their side, gently suggesting that maybe it was time to settle down and focus on family. His spine seemed to dissolve in his parents' presence, the progressive values he claimed to hold bending under the weight of family expectations. The weekly dinners became battlegrounds of passive-aggressive comments and loaded questions. Patricia would gift me books with titles like The Joy of Motherhood and Balancing Family and Career. The latter particularly ironic, since she had never worked a day in her life. Thomas would make comments about women who waited too long and ended up childless and bitter. Audrey, who had 3 children by age 30, would talk about how fulfilling motherhood was while looking pointedly in my direction. Through it all, I maintained my composure. I had bigger concerns than their disapproval, running a global company, managing a team of hundreds, strategizing international expansion. Their petty comments seemed trivial compared to the decisions I made every day that affected millions of users and thousands of service providers. The breaking point came unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon when I stopped by the Reynolds estate to pick up a jacket Jackson had left there. I wasn't expected. Patricia and Robert thought I was at my little office, and the housekeeper let me in without announcing me. As I passed the study, I heard my name and paused. "Sienna has been a disappointment from the beginning," Robert was saying. "Jackson could have married anyone. The Whitmore girl was always interested, and her father sits on 3 major boards." "It's been 5 years," Patricia added. "No children, that modest house, and she still insists on working. It's clear she's not Reynolds material." "The prenup is solid," Thomas's voice now. "Jackson wouldn't lose anything in a divorce." "The question is how to convince him," Robert replied. "He's always been soft-hearted, but a united family front might do it, an intervention of sorts." "The quarterly family dinner next week," Patricia suggested. "We'll all be there. We can present a unified case for why this marriage isn't working." I stood frozen outside the door, my heart pounding. After 5 years of trying to fit in, of enduring their condescension and criticism, they were actively plotting to end my marriage. and based on what my failure to conform to their outdated expectations of what a wife should be. I slipped out without retrieving the jacket, my mind racing. I could confront them, but what would that achieve? I could tell Jackson, but would he believe me over his family? Or would he, as he had so many times before, try to smooth things over without addressing the real issue? No, I decided as I drove home. I would attend their intervention. I would listen to everything they had to say, and then when they were finished, I would show them exactly who they had been underestimating all these years. The invitation came 3 days later. A formal card requesting our presence at a special family dinner to discuss important matters. Jackson thought nothing of it, but I recognized it for what it was, the trap being set. I spent the next week preparing. I gathered financial documents, prepared visual aids, and rehearsed what I would say. I also visited my doctor to confirm what I had begun to suspect. I was pregnant about 12 weeks along. I had planned to tell Jackson in a special way, but now that news would become part of a very different conversation. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully in a simple black dress that concealed my small baby bump. I wore minimal jewelry, just my wedding ring and a pair of small diamond earrings that had been my grandmother's. Jackson commented that I looked unusually serious. "Just tired," I said. "Big project at work." The Reynolds estate was lit up like a Christmas display as we drove through the gates. Jackson's brother's car was already there, as was his sister's SUV. Several other vehicles indicated that extended family had been invited as well, an audience for my humiliation, or so they thought. Patricia greeted us at the door, kissing Jackson warmly and giving me her usual air kiss. "We're in the formal dining room tonight," she announced, which was unusual for a family dinner. The formal dining room, with its long mahogany table and portrait of some stern Reynolds ancestor overlooking the proceedings, was typically reserved for important business dinners and holidays. Everyone was already seated when we entered. Robert at the head of the table, Patricia at the foot, Jackson's siblings and their spouses, his Uncle George and Aunt Elaine, his cousins Peter and Margaret. There were 2 empty chairs in the middle of the table, clearly meant for us, ensuring we would be surrounded on all sides. Dinner was a tense affair. The conversation remained superficial. The weather, a recent charity gala, Thomas's new boat. But there was an undercurrent of anticipation, glances exchanged across the table, a sense of something looming. Jackson seemed oblivious, enjoying his steak and contributing occasional comments about a client he was working with. After dessert had been served and the coffee poured, Robert cleared his throat. The room fell silent immediately. "I've asked you all here tonight for a reason." He began, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "The Reynolds family has a proud tradition dating back over 100 years. We have built a legacy of excellence in business, in community leadership, and in family values. That legacy is of paramount importance to all of us." He looked directly at me as he continued. "Some decisions, while made with the best of intentions, turn out to be mistakes. The mark of wisdom is recognizing those mistakes and correcting course." Patricia picked up seamlessly. "Jackson, darling, we've all watched with concern as your marriage has failed to thrive. 5 years without children, Sienna's continued insistence on working that little job instead of focusing on family, the modest lifestyle that is so below your potential." "What are you talking about?" Jackson interrupted, looking genuinely confused. Thomas leaned forward. "We're talking about divorce, brother. It's time to admit this marriage was a mistake." What followed was like a well-rehearsed play, with each family member taking their turn. Thomas presented a folder of what he called evidence. Photos of Jackson looking bored at event statistics about marriages between different social classes and their failure rates, even a graph showing the declining likelihood of pregnancy with maternal age. Audrey spoke about how a suitable wife would have given Jackson children by now and would be actively involved in family business matters. Uncle George mentioned several eligible daughters of his business associates. Aunt Elaine suggested that while I seemed nice enough, I clearly wasn't Reynolds material. Throughout it all, Jackson sat stunned, occasionally attempting to interject, but mostly just looking back and forth between his family members, as if seeing them for the first time. He didn't defend me, not really. At best, he muttered weak protests like, "That's not fair," or "You don't know the whole story." Finally, Robert produced an envelope and slid it across the table to Jackson. "We've had papers drawn up. Everything is in order, in line with the prenuptial agreement. Sienna will receive a generous settlement, $100,000 plus the house if she wants it. More than fair considering her contributions." The audacity of it was almost impressive. $100,000, a sum that Robert probably considered life-changing for someone of my background. when I had earned $900 million from the Connect Pro acquisition alone. "This is crazy," Jackson finally said, pushing the envelope away. "I'm not divorcing Sienna." "Son," Robert's voice took on a harder edge. "The Reynolds Investment Group has been family-owned for generations. Your position there, your inheritance, your entire future depends on maintaining those family bonds and values. If you choose to remain in this childless, unsuitable marriage, we will have to reconsider your role in the family business." The threat hung in the air. Divorce me or be cut off. Jackson looked panicked, his eyes darting between his father and me. In that moment, I saw him weighing his options, calculating what he stood to lose. The fact that he was considering it at all told me everything I needed to know. Throughout the entire intervention, I had sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, face neutral. Now, as all eyes turned to me, expecting tears, anger, or desperate pleading, I simply smiled slightly. It was time to show the Reynolds family exactly who they had been dealing with all along. "May I speak now?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. The table fell silent. I think they had expected hysterics, not this composed response. "First, I want to thank you all for your concern." I began looking around the table. "It's always illuminating to hear what people really think of you." "Patindant," I turned to Robert first. "You mentioned the Reynolds legacy of excellence in business. I respect that, but you seem to have forgotten that success in business comes from recognizing opportunity and value, not just from maintaining the status quo." Patricia started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "Please, I listen to all of you. I'd appreciate the same courtesy." Surprisingly, she fell silent. For 5 years, I've endured condescension, passive-aggressive comments, and outright hostility from this family. I've been judged based on where I came from, not who I am or what I've accomplished. I've been dismissed as unworthy because I didn't come from money, because I chose to work because I wanted to build something of my own before starting a family. I reached into my purse and took out my phone. "Jackson, would you mind connecting this to the dining room display? I have something I'd like to show everyone." Confused Jackson took my phone and linked it to the large screen mounted on the wall, normally used for Robert's business presentations. With a few taps, I brought up a secure financial portal and entered my credentials. "What you're about to see is confidential business information," I said, as the screen filled with the Connect Pro dashboard, showing real-time data on users, service providers, transactions, and revenue across 8 countries. 5 years ago, I launched a platform that connects service providers with customers. Some of you may have heard of it, Connect Pro. Recognition dawned on several faces. Connect Pro was a household name at this point, with commercials running during primetime television and ads on billboards across major cities. A little over a year ago, tech giant acquired Connect Pro for $1.2 billion. I continued pulling up the acquisition documents with the figures clearly displayed. I maintained my position as CEO and retained a significant ownership stake. The company now has a valuation of approximately $2 billion and continues to grow. I swiped to another screen showing my personal net worth, over $900 million, not including stock options and future performance bonuses. "As you can see, my little job has been quite successful," I said with a small smile. "In fact, my current net worth exceeds the entire Reynolds family fortune by a considerable margin." The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia's mouth had fallen open, Thomas was staring at the screen in disbelief, and Robert looked as if he'd been slapped. Audrey was frantically typing on her phone, presumably searching for confirmation of what I was telling them. "I never needed the Reynolds money or connections," I continued. "I signed that prenuptial agreement without complaint because I knew it was irrelevant. I chose our house because it suited our needs, not because it was all I could afford. And as for children..." I turned to Jackson, who was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. "I was planning to tell you this privately, but under the circumstances, I'm pregnant, 12 weeks along. Our first ultrasound appointment is scheduled for next Tuesday." Jackson's expression transformed from shock to wonder. "You're pregnant? We're having a baby?" "Yes," I confirmed. Though given tonight's events, I'm now questioning what kind of family our child will be born into. I stood up, smoothing my dress. "I need to be clear about something. I never wanted to be a Reynolds. I wanted to be Jackson's wife and partner. I wanted to build a life together based on mutual respect and love, not family names and inheritance. I kept my business success private, not because I was hiding anything, but because it wasn't relevant to our relationship, or shouldn't have been." I looked directly at Robert. "You've presented Jackson with a choice tonight. me or his family legacy. What you fail to understand is that by forcing that choice, you've already lost. Whatever he decides, your relationship with your son is irreparably damaged. You've shown your true values, and they have nothing to do with family and everything to do with control and status. Patricia was the first to recover. Sienna, darling, she said, her voice dripping with newfound warmth, this is wonderful news about the baby. Why didn't you tell us about your business success? We would have been so proud. No, I said simply. You wouldn't have. You would have found a way to diminish it, to attribute it to luck or to connections I must have made through Jackson. Because in your worldview, someone like me, someone from a working class background, someone whose father works with his hands, couldn't possibly achieve more than the mighty Reynolds family. I picked up my purse and turned to Jackson. I'm going home now. You have a decision to make, and I won't influence it either way. If you choose your family's money and approval, the divorce papers are already prepared. If you choose our marriage, our child, and a future based on love and respect, rather than inheritance and obligation, you know where to find me. I walked to the door, then paused and turned back one last time. Oh, and Robert, that $100,000 settlement you so generously offered, I earn more than that every month in interest alone. Just something to consider when you're calculating the value of people. With that, I walked out, leaving stunned silence behind me. As I drove home alone, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. 5 years of pretending to be less than I was, of swallowing insults and enduring condescension were over. Whatever happened next, I would face it as my true self. Not Jackson's questionably suitable wife, but Sienna, entrepreneur, soon-to-be mother and architect of her own destiny. I arrived home to an empty house that suddenly felt too quiet. I kicked off my heels, made a cup of herbal tea, and sat in the darkness of our living room waiting. For what I wasn't entirely sure, Jackson's return, the beginning of the end, or something in between. 2 hours passed before I heard his key in the lock. The door opened slowly and Jackson entered, looking exhausted. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just looking at me. I didn't speak, didn't move. This was his moment to show me who he really was. Finally, he crossed the room and knelt before me, taking my hands in his. I am so sorry, he said, his voice breaking. So incredibly, unforgivably sorry. For what exactly? I asked quietly. For not defending me tonight, for 5 years of letting your family treat me like I was beneath them, or for considering even for a moment their offer to trade our marriage for your inheritance. For all of it, he admitted. For every time I didn't stand up for you, for being so weak, for not seeing what was right in front of me. And what was that? The most remarkable woman I've ever known. Tears filled his eyes. Sienna, I had no idea about Connect Pro, about the acquisition, about any of it. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because when I watched you walk out that door, I realized I might lose the only person who ever loved me for myself, not for my name or my position. And then I realized that I've never really shown you the same respect. I studied his face, looking for sincerity. What did you say to them after I left? I told them they were wrong about everything, that they had just driven away the best thing that ever happened to me. That if being a Reynolds meant thinking and acting the way they did tonight, I wasn't sure I wanted to be one anymore. He gave a small, bitter laugh. Then my father threatened to disinherit me, and I told him he could keep every penny, that I'd rather build something of my own with you than inherit an empire built on that kind of arrogance. It was what I needed to hear, but trust once broken isn't easily repaired. Words are easy in the heat of the moment, Jackson. But this isn't just about tonight. It's about a pattern that's existed since we met. I know, he said, and I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. God, Sienna, how did you stand it for so long? All those dinners, all those comments. Why didn't you ever tell me about your success? Would it have changed anything? I asked honestly. Would knowing I was wealthy have made you stand up to them sooner? Because if so, that's its own problem. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, considering this. No, he finally said. It wouldn't have changed anything, because the real issue was my own weakness, not your worth. I was always afraid of disappointing them, of losing their approval. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really I was just being a coward. He moved to sit beside me on the couch. The baby. Is it really true? I nodded. 12 weeks. I was going to surprise you this weekend. I want to be worthy of you, he said softly. Of you and our child. Not because of your success or your money. That changes nothing for me except that I'm incredibly proud of you. But because of your integrity. You never pretended to be someone you weren't. You never compromised your values even when it would have been easier. What happens now? I asked. That depends on whether you can forgive me, he replied. On whether we can build something new from here. I meant what I said to my family. I choose you with or without their approval. But I understand if it's too late, if the damage is done. I considered his words carefully. Despite everything, I still loved Jackson. He had flaws, serious ones, but tonight had been a breaking point for him as much as for me. The question was whether he would truly change or revert to old patterns once the shock wore off. I need more than words, I said finally. I need to see real change. Clear boundaries with your family. No more allowing them to disrespect me ever. And couples counselling. We need a neutral third party to help us rebuild trust. Jackson nodded eagerly. Yes to all of it. Whatever it takes. And one more thing, I added. No more secrets between us. Not about my business or your family or anything else. Complete honesty from now on. Agreed, he said without hesitation. It wasn't an immediate happily ever after. That night was just the beginning of a long, sometimes painful process of rebuilding our marriage on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The next few months were filled with difficult conversations, both between ourselves and with his family. Patricia was the first to attempt reconciliation, arriving at our door with baby gifts and profuse apologies. I accepted the gifts, but made it clear that her relationship with her grandchild would depend on her ability to show genuine respect, not just the appearance of it, now that she knew about my wealth. Robert took longer. His pride had been wounded not just by the revelation of my success, but by Jackson's willingness to walk away from the family business. Eventually, though, curiosity got the better of him. He reached out to Jackson ostensibly to discuss business matters, but really to feel out whether a reconciliation was possible. Their first meeting was on neutral ground, a downtown restaurant with both men on equal footing. Jackson came home looking thoughtful. He asked about Connect Pro, he reported, about how you built it, how you kept it secret. I think he's genuinely impressed despite himself. And what did you tell him? I asked. That if he wanted to know about your business success, he should ask you himself, as one CEO to another. To my surprise, Robert did exactly that. He requested a meeting businessman to businesswoman. Over lunch at my office, my territory not his, he asked intelligent questions about Connect Pro's business model growth strategy and management philosophy. For the first time, he spoke to me as an equal, not as his son's regrettable choice of wife. You've built something remarkable, he admitted at the end of our lunch. I underestimated you. That's not a mistake I make often in business. Or one you acknowledge often, I imagine, I replied. He gave a rueful smile. True. Pride has always been my weakness. But seeing what you've accomplished, hearing how you did it while dealing with us, it's given me a new perspective. It wasn't an explicit apology, but from Robert, it was significant. So where do we go from here? I asked. I'd like to meet my grandchild, he said simply, and perhaps, if you're open to it, explore ways our businesses might collaborate. The Reynolds Group has connections that could benefit Connect Pro's expansion into certain markets. I'm open to both, I said, but understand this. Our personal relationship and any business relationship will be entirely separate. One will never be contingent on the other. And both require trust, which is something we'll need to build over time. Thomas and Audrey were slower to come around. Thomas in particular seemed unable to reconcile his view of me with the reality of my success. It must have been luck, he said once at a family gathering. Right place, right time. Like being born a Reynolds, I countered, and he had no response. 6 months after the intervention, our daughter Sophia was born. 7 pounds, 6 ounces of pure joy with Jackson's warm brown eyes and my determined chin. Holding her in the hospital with Jackson beside me and both sets of grandparents waiting anxiously in the visitors' lounge, I felt a sense of completion. Not because motherhood defined me, but because I had reached a point in my life where all the pieces, career, marriage, family, existed in harmony on my terms. Patricia was transformed by grandmotherhood. She still occasionally made tone-deaf comments, but they came from habit rather than malice. She doted on Sophia and, to my surprise, began asking thoughtful questions about balancing motherhood and career. I never had the chance, she admitted during one of her visits. Or perhaps I never took it. In my generation, women of my background were expected to focus solely on family and social obligations. Watching you manage both, it's quite remarkable. Robert, too, showed a softer side as a grandfather. He would read business journals to baby Sophia, telling her about market trends and investment strategies in the same gentle voice other grandfathers might use for fairy tales. It was his way of bonding, and though unconventional, it was genuine. As for Jackson and me, we emerged stronger from the crisis. The couple's counselling helped us develop better communication patterns and reset our expectations of each other. Jackson found his voice, not just with his family, but in his career. He eventually left the Reynolds Investment Group to start his own financial advisory firm, focused on socially responsible investing, something he had always been passionate about, but had never pursued for fear of disappointing his father. I used to think success meant following in my father's footsteps, he told me on the day he signed the lease for his new office. Now I understand it means having the courage to walk your own path. 3 years after that fateful intervention dinner, we hosted a family gathering at our home. Still the same 4-bedroom house, though we'd added a home office and a playground in the backyard. Both sides of the family were present: the Reynolds with their designer clothes and polished manners, and my parents with their working-class honesty and warmth. Watching my father teach Robert how to grill the perfect steak, seeing my mother and Patricia comparing notes on Sophia's latest milestones, I reflected on how far we'd come. Not because the Reynolds had accepted me into their world, but because we had created a new world together. One based on mutual respect rather than social hierarchy. The journey wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension and misunderstanding, but we had found a path forward one step at a time with honesty and determination. Looking back, I realized that the intervention the Reynolds staged was actually a gift. It forced everyone's true values into the light, created a breaking point that allowed for genuine change, and freed me from the exhausting pretense of being less than I was. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives are also the most transformative. Have you ever been underestimated or judged based on appearances? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if my journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their worth isn't determined by other people's perceptions. Remember, the most powerful thing you can be is authentically yourself. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to stand tall in your own truth.